1 year since the horrific attacks of October 7th in Israel, and 1 year since rallies in support, in celebration of that terrorist attack have been going on. Hi, I'm Brian Lilley, political columnist for the Toronto Sun. It's been a difficult year, and this is a difficult anniversary for people around the world, especially Canada's Jewish community. But what is it like 1 year later living in a country where many Jews simply say they no longer feel safe, they no longer feel welcome? Joe Roberts has written about this in the National Post and joins me now. Joe, it's been, what, 10, 11 months since you first wrote that you were considering whether Canada was still safe for you and your family, given that you are Jews. Well, how do you feel now when the rallies, the marches, the rhetoric hasn't changed, and our government has, in my view, moved Canada further away from our traditional position, closer to, well, I actually think that Melanie Joly wants us to be part of Team Hamas. Given all that, how are you feeling? How are friends and family that you're talking to feeling?
I mean, look, I don't think there's been any significant change in the last year. I think there's a lot of fear. And everything we see in the streets, the tepid responses we see from Ottawa, reinforce that concern of the question of, do Jews have a future in this country? I think it's a really serious thing that Canadians should be asking themselves, whether Jewish or not, as what kind of country are we creating here? Are we allowing to be created under our banner, under our name, when, contributing members of our society who have been part of the social fabric of Canada for hundreds of years are now questioning their future in this country? So, no, Brian, I don't feel any less unsafe than I did back in November of last year. I would say the questions are more serious now than ever, especially given what's been playing out in the Middle East over the last 2 weeks.
Toronto Police Chief Myron Demkiw held a news conference the other day, and I was able to ask him questions. He was talking about, how he and his force were going to be managing the protests over the weekend, the anniversary, what they're going to be doing in the coming weeks and months, and how great a job they've been doing. I have not been hearing from anyone in the Jewish community or people who are just concerned with the hate they see in the streets. I don't know anyone that thinks the Toronto Police Service is doing a good job. And when I speak to officers, they say it all starts at the top and direction comes from the top. Chief Demkiw defended himself and said, you simply have a different perspective, Brian. Well, what's your perspective?
Well, look, I think it's a question of political will, right? The police are going to do what they're told from the political leaders. And political leaders have shown over the last year that they have no intention of stopping this hate that's going through our streets, right? I mean, we've heard, as far as when a horrible attack that is so blatant, like the shooting at the Chabad girls' school a few months ago, we heard, every politician across the country say, oh, this is not the Canada that we are. This hate can't go unchecked. But there's no action. It's just words, right? Words are not going to solve this. It's not going to put it back in the box. And it certainly is the Canada we seem to be becoming, because it happens every day. It's, there was a moral outrage, rightfully so, when neo-Nazi protesters marched in Charlottesville a few years ago. And we're seeing that same kind of hatred in the streets every single day of in this country. And no one seems to be raising the alarm with concern except for the Jewish community. And the other side is simply calling us alarmist. We're not alarmist. We've been here before. We've seen this before. We know where this leads, and we're concerned, rightfully so.
I've been calling the protests and the marches where they call for the elimination of Israel, where Jews are clearly targeted, and chants like "Go back to Europe" are regularly sung out. I've been calling them pro-Hamas and now pro-Hezbollah rallies since last October. Most of my colleagues in the media still are portraying this as, well, they're just pro-Palestinian and they're there to protest, for protection of people in Gaza. No, they're not. They are screaming for the elimination of Israel. They are cheering for success for Hezbollah and Hamas. Now, we've heard politicians denounce it. Thankfully, now there have been a couple of arrests. The other day, 2 men arrested for carrying a Hezbollah flag, a designated terrorist group. They were arrested and charged. There have apparently been 72 arrests over the last year, according prior to these two. So I guess now 74, according to Chief Demke. That's just in Toronto. But I think there needs to be more. Uh, how are we would not allow what happened in Charlottesville to happen again and again. You know, if that was happening in Toronto and it happened once, people would say, ooh, that was bad. We should stop that from happening in the future. Instead, you've got marches every week, sometimes multiple marches a week. We've got public service unions joining in celebrating this, which is just utterly sick and bizarre to me. They're being sued by their own members who are Jewish. This just they simply have to put a stop to these marches, cheering for a terrorist group to kill other people and then doing it in the face of Jewish Canadians. I don't think that, you know, charter protections don't extend to that. That's not what the charter is there for.
It's certainly not free expression, as the charter calls for. It's something much more nefarious. And I think, look, Brian, you talked about at the beginning of that, you mentioned that these are not people in the streets fighting for Palestinian rights. And I agree with you completely, right? This is a moral veneer that they're using to try to obfuscate reality, which is this is a worldview that is dangerous. It's dangerous to Canada. It's dangerous to our values. It's dangerous to our allies, right? This is a nexus in the streets that we're seeing of both those kind of folks who are anti-Israel, the kind of traditional anti-Israel haters that have been around. We know who they are. They've been spouting the same stuff for the last couple of decades. But there's also this kind of worldview. It's the same people who were pro-Russia during the invasion of Ukraine, right? These are folks who believe in kind of the vilification of the West, want to see our way of life destroyed, want to see a kind of a new world order replace the rules-based international order that Canada is rightfully a part of. So there's kind of a nexus of nefarious stuff happening here, and it's something that I think is really concerning. But all of the hate, all of the focus has fallen on Israel, a country that has been fighting a seven-front war for the last year, really against Iran. At the end of the day, Hamas, Hezbollah, all the Ansar Allah in Yemen, these are all proxies of the Iranian regime. And we're seeing that come to a head in the last week, which I think, you know, is a game changer in the conflict, and hopefully will start to change the narrative here as well.
You know, not that Canada's voice matters on the world stage anymore, but I wish Melanie Joly and Justin Trudeau would put as much pressure on Iran as they do on Israel. Let me ask you this. I've asked you your feelings as a Jew living in Canada. Now let me ask you from a different perspective. You're originally from the United States. You're a Democrat down in the United States. Democrats love Canada because that's what you want the United States to become. Canada's peaceful, loving, wonderful, progressive. Does this shock you? I know you've been in Canada a while, but are you surprised from your view of the country when you first moved up here to now looking around and saying, this wasn't what I expected?
It shocked me the first day I got involved in politics in Canada, actually. So it's not that I was surprised necessarily on October 7th. I was surprised years before that. You know, I'd been involved in progressive politics and democratic politics for many years. Not once had my Jewish identity been questioned as what is your view of Israel, right? But you have to justify that in some way. That had never happened in those spaces in the United States. I'm not saying that it wouldn't today. Things have shifted and changed. But that was the question from day one when I arrived in Canada and was involved in progressive politics. It's anti-Semitism, right? It's to force a Jew 7,000 miles away to justify their politics and their beliefs on a country that they're not a citizen of was something that happened here. So on October 7th, when I saw things like, you know, the Fred Hahn tweet that's now infamous about resistance and how beautiful it was, didn't surprise me in the least. I thought it would be coming. I didn't necessarily expect the depth of it. I didn't expect those alliances that the Jewish community had built over many years to be torn apart so quickly. And I didn't expect how, you know, just how deep that anger and hatred of Israel and by proxy, the Jewish people in Canada had become. And I think what we're seeing now is it's not limited to Israel, right? It's now permeating our politics in a totally different way. And I mean, the labor union is a perfect example. they're not listening, they're not fulfilling their mandate of fighting for workers' rights here in Canada anymore, nor are they listening to their members who are saying, hey, I have deep concerns with this. I mean, we saw the whole rigmarole with Fred Hahn and the attempted removal that didn't go anywhere. Really shows me that this kind of political leaning, this angry, hateful political leaning has permeated these institutions, and it's a problem that we're going to have to face in the future.
It's you're right about the alliances. I knew the anti-Semitism was there in certain parts of the progressive movement, but I also knew that that's where Jewish Canadians had parked their vote, been politically active for the most part for, as you say, decades. And it was a wholesale abandonment, in my view. And I say that as a non-Jew, but someone who works with and supports Canada's Jewish community and anytime and anywhere that I can. I was still surprised at how it happened. Do know that you have allies. Do know that the silent majority is with you. It's just sometimes that wish they wouldn't be silent. The other side is definitely loud. So it's a sad anniversary for us to be talking, but thanks for taking the time, Joe.
Well, thank you, Brian. I appreciate it.
Let us know what you think, what your experience is. If you have any, share them in the comments below. Share this on social media, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel.